Oh, there's no plant again. What if one of the biggest things limiting your life isn't your circumstances, your past, or your lack of opportunity? Instead, it's a label. And highly likely a label that you created. A sentence someone said, a description repeated often enough, a role you were assigned, an identity you accepted without realizing it. Things like, you're shy, you're difficult, you're too sensitive, you're lazy, you're emotional, you're not academic, you're bad with money, you're the responsible one, you're the black sheep, you're intense, you're just not leadership material, you always sabotage yourself, you're an anxious person. Many people don't realize that instead of living from the truth, they're living from labels. And labels are powerful because once something becomes part of an identity, it absolutely starts shaping behavior automatically. And positive labels can limit in exactly the same way. So today we're going to go deep into how labels get installed, how they become beliefs, how beliefs drive behavior, and how to examine and release one that may be costing you more than you think. Because sometimes the problem isn't who you are, it's actually who you were told you are, or who you believe yourself to be. So let's start here. What is a label? A label is a simplified identity statement attached to a person. It takes something complex and turns it into something fixed, immutable, unchanging. So instead of you struggled with confidence in year 8, it becomes you're really insecure. Instead of you made a mistake when you were coloring in and went outside the lines, it becomes you're careless. Instead of you feel deeply, it becomes you're just too much. Instead of you need some time to warm up, it becomes you're shy. Labels often begin as merely as observations. And then they harden into conclusions, and conclusions repeated enough time, they just start to feel like the facts. And that's where the cost begins. So where do labels come from? Well, labels can come from anywhere, really. Your family, like in each family, there seems to be roles assigned, the smart one, the difficult one, the quiet one, the golden child, the emotional one, the strong one, the screw up, the peacemaker. And these roles, they kind of begin unconsciously. However, they can shape people for decades. Another place is school. One teacher says you're not academic, one coach says you're not athletic, one peer group says you're weird, one experience says you don't belong. And because identity is still forming, these moments carry massive emotional weight. In relationships, a partner calls you needy. An ex says that you're hard work. Someone says you're intimidating. Someone says no one would be able to handle you. And if unexamined, these opinions can actually become your internal narrative. In society and culture, there's messages about age, gender, success, motherhood, money, beauty, intelligence, leadership, and emotion, and you absorb far more than you realize. So how do labels become beliefs? Well, this is where it gets important. A label by itself is literally just language. And that old saying of sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me, that's what that comes in, right? It's just language. However, when it's emotionally charged, when it's repeated, or when you accept it when you're very young, it actually becomes a belief. And the sequence looks a little bit like this. First of all, you have an event. From that event, you create a meaning. That meaning creates your identity creates your behavior, and your behavior is what gives you evidence. So let's break that down a bit. Just say someone has a belief that they're bad with money. So the event is someone overspent, like you overspent, you made mistakes, or you grew up around financial stress. And the meaning that you make is money is difficult for me. The identity you create is I'm bad with money. The behavior is avoiding budgeting, delaying decisions, overspending, undercharging, and procrastination. The evidence that you have is more money problems, and that perpetuates the cycle. So now the label feels true. However, often the behavior was driven by the belief. Here's another example. You're just too much. Someone couldn't meet your emotional depth. That was the event. The meaning you made was, my needs are actually a burden to others. The identity you took on was, I'm literally too much. The behavior looks like you shrinking, self-censoring, people-pleasing, and accepting the crumbs. And the evidence you have is unfulfilling relationships. So again, the label appears confirmed and the cycle repeats. Another example, I'm not a leader. The event was, you were overlooked once. You weren't picked first. The meaning you made was, others are more capable. The identity is, I'm not leadership material. The behavior is to stay silent, to play small, to defer, to hesitate. And the evidence is that you have less influence. And this is why identity matters so much, because it just, when we get that evidence, it self-perpetuates. People tend to behave in ways that are consistent with who they believe they are. And this is why labels are so powerful, because the human mind loves certainty. A label gives the mind a shortcut. It says, this is who I am, this is how I operate, this is what you should expect from me, this is what's possible for me. And even painful labels can feel safe purely because they're familiar. For example, if you believe that you're shy, you don't have to risk visibility. If you believe that you're unlucky, you never really have to try. If you believe you're broken, then you can explain every struggle that you have in life. If you believe you're not enough, you'll expect a lot less. You see, labels reduce uncertainty. However, they also reduce your life. So what do they really cost you? Well, the cost is rarely just emotional. It affects your behavior, your relationships, your income, your well-being, and most of all, your potential. These beliefs, they filter, or these labels that are beliefs, they actually filter what you notice. If you believe I always fail, then your mind actually becomes biased towards evidence of failure and blind to growth. It influences decisions. If you believe you're not confident, you may avoid rooms that would actually help build your confidence. They shape relationships. If you believe I'm hard to love, then you're actually going to tolerate being treated poorly or having to test people constantly in relationship. They limit expression. If you believe that you're not creative, then you just won't ever start. And the fifth one, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. You act from the label, and then you use the outcome to prove the label. And that loop just runs and runs and runs and runs. There's one important distinction though, and this is labels versus reality. So in this example, not every single label is malicious or completely false. Sometimes the labels that we have describe some patterns. For example, you may currently struggle with organization, or you may currently feel anxious. You may currently be quiet in groups. A pattern is a lot less than an identity. Your current behavior is never your permanent truth. State is changeable. The experience that you're having is so much bigger than the essence, actually that's wrong. The essence of who you are is so much bigger than the experience you're currently having. And this distinction is super important, because when people confuse what I'm experiencing with who I am, then change feels impossible. So let's look at a practical process to examine and release a label. We're going to make this a bit useful. So I want you to walk through this process with me, and I want you to use it today. So go and grab a journal if you want, grab a pen, and I want you to choose one label that seems to have followed you around. Perhaps it's I'm too sensitive, I'm lazy, I'm bad with money, I'm anxious, I'm not disciplined, I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm always overlooked. Now we're going to work through it. So step number 1, identify the label clearly. You're going to write this down. The label I've been carrying is, and then you go ahead and write. I want you to be really honest. I'm not interested in the polished version. I want the real sentence. Great. Number 2, ask yourself, right?
Sorry.
Number 2, ask yourself, where did this come from? Who said it first? Who reinforced it? When did I decide that this was true? What was actually happening in my life at the time? And often you'll discover the label was formed in a much younger version of you with limited perspective. And that matters because a child's conclusion is rarely an adult truth. Step number 3, let's separate the facts from your interpretation. So ask yourself, what are the actual facts? And what is the story layered on top? For example, the fact might have been that you were quiet in school, yet the story becomes that you're socially incapable. The fact might be that you struggled with money skills, yet the story becomes I'm hopeless with money. The fact might be you feel too deeply, and the story becomes you're so sensitive. By doing this step, you can create massive relief for your internal nervous system. So let's look at the cost of believing these labels. How has believing this is step number 4, how has believing this affected your life? Where have you played smaller? What have you avoided? What opportunities did you just dismiss? What relationships did you accept? What energy has this consumed? And you want to make this cost visible. People often change faster when they see the price of staying the same. Step number 5. We're going to get you to look for contradictory evidence. So we're going to challenge the certainty on these beliefs, on these labels. So when has this not been true? For example, if the label is I'm lazy, when have you been committed? If the label is I'm not confident, when have you been brave? And if the label is I'm bad with money, go back. Thanks. Where have you learned, earned, or improved? If the label is too much, I'm too much, where have you been deeply valued? Your mind may have ignored all that evidence and it's still stored there. So we're just going to bring that back into view. Step number 6, replace your identity rather than the thought. Instead of fake affirmations that you don't even believe, I want you to choose something honest and expandable. For example, the old belief is I'm bad with money, and the new belief is I'm learning financial leadership. The old belief is I'm shy, and the new belief is I take time to warm up and I can connect deeply. The old belief is I'm too sensitive, and the new belief is I notice deeply and feel richly. The old belief is I'm not disciplined, and the new belief is I'm building trust through small, consistent effort. The new identity should feel believable and directional. So go ahead and write those down. Step number 7, prove it through your behaviour. So identity changes fastest when your behaviour aligns. So you ask yourself, what would someone with this new identity do today? Then make it tiny. Send the message to yourself, set the boundary, apply for the role, track your money, speak up once, post the content, take the walk, keep the promise, because small evidence compounds and starts you believing some new empowering beliefs. So let's do a whole one together. Let's take I'm too sensitive. Where did it come from? Well, from a whole lot of people in my family that were uncomfortable with emotion. Okay, what are the facts? Well, I do notice people's tone. I care really deeply. I feel impact quickly. Okay, great. What's the cost of having this? Well, it means I suppress my needs. I second guess my reactions. I stay silent. I actually accept really poor behavior. Now, what's the contradictory evidence? Well, my sensitivity helps me read rooms, care for others, create connection, and notice what truly matters. So what does your new identity look like? Well, my sensitivity is intelligence that needs boundaries. What's the new behavior you're going to do today? I speak one honest need without apologizing. That is how labels begin to loosen. Part number 9, what releasing a label feels like. It may not feel dramatic at first. Often it feels like a little bit more space, more choice, less shame, less defensiveness, more courage, more self-respect, more possibility. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, what else could be true? And that question can change your life. So here's the final truth. Some labels were given to you by people who were actually hurting. Some people who were misunderstood, that's wrong. Some people gave you labels because they misunderstood you. Some were given by systems that needed simplicity. Some by younger versions of you doing the best to make sense of your pain. And none of that means that they must remain your identity. You're allowed to update the story. You're allowed to outgrow your old language. You're allowed to become unfamiliar to the version of you that you built around limitation. So here's what I'd love you to reflect on. What label have you been carrying? And what has it been costing you? Write it down, question it, challenge it, choose again, because the moment you realize a label is learned rather than the truth, you actually reclaim your power. If this resonated, I'd love you to comment below. What label are you ready to release? And if you want more content on identity, mindset, self-trust, communication, and lasting transformation, subscribe and follow us along. Jump onto my Instagram, ElizabethAnnWalker_EAWTC. Send me a message. I'll reach back out.